Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons Naturally Aspirated, Dungeons & Dragons Turbocharged, and Dungeons & Dragons Supercharged. Alright, so if you know anything about cars, Naturally Aspirated, Turbocharged, and Supercharged are all ways that air is put into the car's cylinder, okay, into a car's cylinder. So it's all ways that an engine puts air into a car cylinder. And each one is different, right? However, even though each one is different, each one is a proven method of getting air into a car cylinder, right? And they each give different amounts of power to the car and allow the car to go forward, right? Now, basically, the reason why we're talking about this today is I recently saw Gears and Gasoline. I've been learning more about sports cars specifically, and the car scene, right? And the community around the car scene, right? The car community, the sports car community specifically, right? And it's been quite fascinating. And so they did a specific video. Gears and Gasoline is the YouTube channel. And basically, the video, if you want to watch it, I highly recommend watching it. It's a really fantastic video about 3 Acura NSXs. So Acura NSX is a classic JDM type sports car. That's Japanese domestic market sports car that came over back in the early 90s. Absolutely beautiful, stunner car. They're really respected, and they're really sought after in the sports car community because, you know, they give you the same type of performance, the same type of look, the same type of fun that you're going to get from a Dodge Viper or a Lotus Esprit at a much lower cost, right? Although they are starting to go up in value. So with that said, right, the Acura NSX there are 3 Acura NSXs in this Gears and Gasoline episode. So the first one is a turbocharged Acura NSX. It actually had wrap from Macross Robotech, which is pretty awesome. And then the next was a Acura NSX pure red, beautiful car. Very much a stance car as well, like lowered. And that Acura NSX specifically was supercharged. And then the last Acura NSX, which was really kind of kitted out almost like a stock car from NASCAR, you know, with stock car stickers and sponsorships and all, was a naturally aspirated Acura NSX. And so I watched this video, and I'm watching it, and I'm looking at these 3 cars, and they just did such a great job of showing you these 3 cars. And when you're looking at the naturally aspirated system, the turbocharged system, and the supercharged system, and I'm going to explain the difference between the 3. When I was looking at that, you know, they're saying, look at these, you know, cool, each one of these guys has a different cool way to get air for their engines to get air into the cylinder, right? And I was like, yeah, that's really interesting. And then I was thinking about it, and all 3 of these systems, naturally aspirated, turbocharged, and supercharged, these are all valid systems that are used by multiple people in that community, and they're proven. These systems are proven. None of these are new. None of these are like wonky little weird one-offs. None of these are like use it and it breaks. These are time-tested, proven systems for doing the same thing, for making the car go forward. And when I looked at those systems, naturally aspirated, turbocharged, and supercharged, I realized we have those same systems in Dungeons & Dragons. We absolutely have naturally aspirated, turbocharged, and supercharged Dungeons & Dragons games, right? And so I want to talk about those today. So first, let me explain exactly what these are. And I need to go turbocharged, supercharged, naturally aspirated. So turbocharged and supercharged are the same in that they are both forced induction systems. They take air, they use both systems, turbocharged and supercharged, both use specifically a device. They each use a slightly different device, but they're both spinning devices, right? That then take air and push it into the cylinder, right? But actually, both turbocharged and supercharged do compressed air, right? Compressed. They take compressed air, force it into the cylinder, and because it's compressed, you can put a lot more air through the cylinder, okay? So if they're both forced induction, if they're both doing compressed air, what is the difference? Well, it's the air part, okay? Turbocharge uses exhaust gases. It's taking the exhaust that's being kicked off the engine and recycles it back into the engine, putting it through the turbine, right? Whereas a supercharger, it's not using the exhaust system it's not using exhaust gas from the car itself. It's using available air, right? And so it has a device. It spins up whatever air is available around it, right? And that air goes directly into the cylinders, right? Now, why would you use one over the other, right? Well, a turbocharger is more efficient because it's using the exhaust gases, right? A supercharger, gives you boost at virtually all RPMs, right? So basically, because the turbocharger has to use the exhaust gas from the system. So if there isn't an exhaust gas to use, it's not going to be as even, right? Whereas with the supercharger, it's using available gas and putting it through, right? And so, and there's always it's using available air and compressing it and putting it through the system, right? Into the cylinder specifically. So basically, both forced induction, right? Both using compression, but turbocharge uses exhaust gas and supercharge uses available air, all right? Now, that is supercharge and turbocharge. And you use turbocharge if you want more efficiency. You use supercharge if you want more boost at virtually all RPMs, revolutions per minute, okay? All right, what about naturally aspirated, okay? Well, naturally aspirated just takes available air and puts it into the cylinder without compression. So it is naturally slower. So both turbocharged and supercharged will make a car go faster than a naturally aspirated car. Period. End of sentence. Okay? So turbocharged and supercharged cars are faster than naturally aspirated cars. Okay? And so, this is important to understand, right? All right. So with all that said, right, how does that link to Dungeons & Dragons, right? Well, we have Dungeons & Dragons naturally aspirated, Dungeons & Dragons turbocharged, and Dungeons & Dragons supercharged, okay? So what is Dungeons & Dragons naturally aspirated? Dungeons & Dragons naturally aspirated, excuse me, is rules as written, D&D raw, okay? Rules as written, all right? So what is Dungeons & Dragons turbocharged? Dungeons & Dragons turbocharged is Dungeons & Dragons D&D indie. So indie mechanics and maybe even indie settings coming into Dungeons & Dragons, right? A good example of this is Player Agency, which was brought forward by Powered by the Apocalypse and Fate, would be a dungeon master using Player Agency in a Dungeons & Dragons game, okay? That would be an example of turbocharge, right? And then Dungeons & Dragons Supercharge is D&D homebrew. D&D homebrew. What is homebrew? Homebrew is when a dungeon master says, I know better than the designers, and I am going to change this rule, right? And then they're making a rule that is only available and only used in their house, right? Their home, right? So they're brewing their own rules, their own settings sometimes at, I think mostly this is rule specific. So I really wouldn't bring this into the setting realm. So they're using they're changing the rules of Dungeons and Dragons and applying specifically homebrew, right? And they're bringing in rules that are only used in their home, right? And this is done a lot because people are like, oh, a polearm would do more damage than it says here in the Dungeons and Dragons book. By the way, you can run D&D aspirated, you can run D&D turbocharged, you can run D&D supercharged in 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, or 5E, right? So you can have a 2E supercharged, you can have a 4E turbocharged, right? And you could have a 5E naturally aspirated, Okay. All right. So basically, and there are more ways that people use the Dungeons and Dragons rule set, but these are well respected D&D Raw, D&D Indie, and D&D Homebrew. There are respected dungeon masters, highly skilled dungeon masters who have used each one of these effectively, and they are proven. These aren't just some wonky one-offs. These aren't a weird idea that somebody had. These have been done hundreds of times in each channel. There's hundreds of really good naturally aspirated D&D naturally aspirated games. There are hundreds of really good D&D homebrew games. There are hundreds of D&D indie games, right? And D&D Raw. There's hundreds of executions of demonstrating that this works, and players can have fun and dungeon masters can have fun, right, with each one of these. So I want to talk about, well, the question then comes up, especially, this question really comes up in the car community first, and then we'll talk about it on the D&D side. So if turbocharge and supercharge put out way more power and make a car go way faster than a naturally aspirated car, why would anybody have actually use a naturally aspirated car? Respect, all right? You could take a 1968, a stock production, right? 1969 Camaro, just cleaned. That's all you do, just clean it, right? Everything's original, right? You could put that thing up, at any car show, right? And stand a lady next to her 1969 Camaro, right? And then you could take another lady and stand her right next to her. All right, so what are we going to use? Let's say a 2018 Ford Mustang let's take three of them. 1960, actually, yeah, we could do it this way. Let's do a 1969 naturally aspirated Mustang, okay? Pure original stock. Then take a 2018 turbocharged, spoilered, right, Mustang, right? And then take a 2018 supercharged, spoilered Mustang, right? Oh, and the 69 has a spoiler on it too, right? Okay, naturally aspirated, turbocharged, supercharged, okay? Now, the reality is, if you bring in everybody at the show, even the gawkers, and say, who's got the best car, you definitely might get a pick of one of the 2018s, or you might get a pick of one of the 2018 supercharged or turbocharged from the popular vote, right? But when you talk to the people who actually have built cars and know how to work on engines and are respected in the car community, they're not just looky-loos, right? Every time they will pick that naturally aspirated. And the reason why is that's the real deal, man. That's the OG. That's the original. You know what I mean? And that is, you just can't beat that, right? Naturally aspirated, original 1969. That gets respect from the people who know, right? So the people in the community, the people who are in the know, they will pick the naturally aspirated every time over a car that goes much, much faster, right? That handles much, much better, right? And so that's why you would choose naturally aspirated over turbocharged or supercharged. Respect. And it's exactly the same in Dungeons and Dragons, right? I think if you take highly skilled dungeon masters, right, and experienced players, and you show them a D&D rules as written game, okay, D&D naturally aspirated. If you show them a Dungeons and Dragons indie, Dungeons and Dragons turbocharged. If you show them a D&D homebrew, Dungeons and Dragons supercharged, and say, okay, Adam Cobell, Luke Crane, Kate Welch, if you ask people who know, you know what I mean, Sly Flourish. If you go to the community, the guy from Fistful of Dice, if you ask the people who know, they're going to choose naturally aspirated every time. Naturally aspirated, right? They're going to choose D&D Raw because they know it's harder, and they know it's just pure and it's closer to Gary Gygax's vision, right? And so that's the key. That's why you would run naturally aspirated compared to turbocharged or supercharged, even though turbocharged and supercharged really can be a lot. They can be a lot more fun for dungeon masters and for players. you know, if you want respect, if you want, you know, the people who know to respect your game, that's one of the reasons why you would choose naturally aspirated, D&D naturally aspirated. So, so I think that's a really interesting distinction, and you know, and so I really just wanted to bring this to you because, you know, actually, Dungeons and Dragons is such a special blessing to me. Like, and really, there's certainly, you know, when I'm looking at the world, right? When I'm looking at the world, a lot of times I don't see Dungeons and Dragons, right? But when I'm seeing something beautiful, I see Dungeons and Dragons. When I look at other communities that are exciting and flourishing and that are creative, I see Dungeons and Dragons. When I look at architecture, I see Dungeons and Dragons. When I see elegantly complex systems, I see Dungeons and Dragons. So when I watched an amazing 4K video on an Acura NSX naturally aspirated, and an Acura NSX turbocharged, an Acura NSX supercharged, I saw the D&D rule sets, you know, in those cars, right? And it's just, you know, so I think it's really interesting. Now, also, last thing is I'll say, all of these are, it's good, better, best, right? So all of these are good systems, but what is my opinion on good, better, best, right? So I think good is Dungeons and Dragons homebrew. Better, Dungeons & Dragons Indie. And best is Dungeons & Dragons Raw. So good, Dungeons & Dragons Supercharged. Better, Dungeons & Dragons Turbocharged. And best is Dungeons & Dragons Naturally Aspirated. Thank you very much.